Do we have the presentation? I'll start anyway. That's fine. It's nearly lunchtime. I'll just get going. Morning, everybody. Thanks. Good to see you all. Yes, this session is about valuing the perspectives of people with an intellectual disability and dementia. Before we can do that, we need to take a step back. Before we can value perspectives, we need to understand and know what those perspectives are. And that's something that we're not necessarily very good at. What I'll suggest is that perhaps we create some of these barriers in terms of not understanding, not being inclusive, not seeking the relevant perspectives. And I think it's important too that we recognize the difference in how dementia is experienced by everybody, no less so by people with an intellectual disability. But what we should realize is that people with an intellectual disability are already marginalized by other people's perceptions of that disability. So we're talking about people who are already stereotyped, already have lifelong cognitive changes, and already experiencing stigma as a result of other people's actions. So we've heard some of this from Diane as well already. So we have multiple jeopardy. So what I'm going to look at today, what you'll have to listen to rather than look at, is to understand what we can do in response to this. So what strategies and supports do we have in place that could actually be more inclusive, but also make life more easier, more acceptable for people with intellectual disabilities who find themselves with a diagnosis of dementia. Now, I was going to say that the images used in the presentation were from 2 training resources that I've developed, and they're all posed by actors. So should the presentation appear at some point, then they are actors in the slides. I can see people scurrying away behind the scenes back there. So the first picture that you can't see is actually not one of our actors. It's actually a photograph from 1950. And it's a family photograph, a typical of the time extended family holiday. Everybody goes away together to the seaside. And in the middle of that picture is a lady with Down syndrome, and called Joyce, and dressed in her Sunday best, you can imagine. The rest is the typical seaside photographs with the knotted handkerchiefs and the dresses tucked up. And Joyce at that time was in her late 40s. Very unusual at that time for someone with Down syndrome to live that long, where life expectancy for children was actually in single figures at that point. So very unusual from that context. But also Joyce died in her late 40s of an undetected heart condition. And again, at the time, this wouldn't have been checked or picked up on. Today, very different. So we see today that heart conditions treated at birth for children with Down syndrome, absolutely as it should be. And the reason that I showed that photograph is to highlight that Joyce wasn't particularly typical of her time, but also talking to you today, I realize that she may also not have been typical of many situations across Europe now. So I know that people are in very different situations in terms of where people with intellectual disability live, how people are supported, who they live with. So a generation of people with intellectual disability were lost during World War II. So we know that some, particularly Eastern European countries, are seeing their first ever population of aging people with an intellectual disability, even before the early onset of dementia. And we are talking about early onset, particularly in the case of people with Down syndrome. So the figures suggest 1 in 3 people will have a diagnosis in their 50s. And as people are now living into their 60s with Down syndrome, which is a good thing, but we know that number will also increase, and that incidence will increase as well. So I was privileged recently to co-host an international summit on intellectual disability and dementia in Scotland. And we looked at some neglected areas here around advanced dementia, for example, in people with intellectual disability and dementia, We looked at the lack of self-advocacy among people with intellectual disability and dementia and families. We also looked at the lack of representation in national dementia plans and strategies, other than recognising that there is a link between the two. Very few go beyond that. And these omissions limit our understanding of people's experience of living with both an intellectual disability and dementia. But certainly a consensus that a human rights approach is required to provide appropriate and accessible information. So what's stopping us doing that? Well, the study that I'm involved in at the moment, which I'll say a little bit more about later, but 3 barriers identified by the team very quickly. And the first being to people taking part and actually being able to participate and share their experiences and their stories. The first being medication, medication, medication. I could talk for the full 15 minutes about the over-medication of people with intellectual disability, even without dementia. But it became apparent at the start of the study that staff in the social care environments were attributing changes in behaviour to the dementia rather than actually looking at what else might have been contributing to that. And when we saw the amount of medication that people were on, a lot of antipsychotic medication, a lot of combinations of medication that should not have been together, we had to ask for a medication review of everybody before they could actually take part. The second barrier actually to people taking part was what we were looking to do was to implement, what we are doing, is implementing non-drug supports with people who have an intellectual disability and dementia. And I see there's a lot on the programme over the next couple of days about that, which is great. So things like music playlists, therapy pets, aromatherapy, reminiscence, life story work, whole range of non-drug supports. But studies are by and large not inclusive of people who have an intellectual disability as well as dementia. So that's what we're doing. So we wanted to be able to include a full range of non-drug interventions, technological, non-technological, digital, but many people who wanted to take part actually did not have access to the internet, to Wi-Fi. And whether that's because they lived on their own and it wasn't a conversation that had been had with them, or whether their service provider, because let's just jump forward. That was the photograph you didn't see. And what I was going to tell you was that's actually my family. So Joyce was my great aunt, and the little girl front left is my mum. So moving forward, so the barriers actually having access to the internet prevented us from some of the interventions that people would have liked to have selected for themselves. So we didn't randomly say, okay, you have this intervention, you have that one, and you have that one. We used goal-setting tools with all of the participants with dementia to identify what they wanted to do that perhaps was becoming difficult for them as dementia progressed, or something that they thought would make their life easier, or just something that they wanted to try. But we were restricted in some cases. And that internet access wasn't, we literally cover the length and breadth of Scotland, and it actually wasn't necessarily people in the more remote areas who didn't have Wi-Fi. There's some really good technological examples there. But actually we had someone in the middle of one of the biggest cities in Scotland who couldn't access some of the interventions because he didn't have internet access. And the third there, I've posed as more of a question, that how can we actually get the views of people with intellectual disability about dementia if that person doesn't know that they have dementia? And actually, we're not very good at sharing that diagnosis. And often, the person may not understand the word dementia, but that doesn't mean that we can't have the conversations about someone being ill, about acknowledging the changes that people are experiencing. And that very much is part of the standards of dementia care in Scotland. The first one being, I have the right to a diagnosis. But I would add to that that the right to a diagnosis is actually an appropriate and accessible, in an appropriate and accessible manner. And I think that's really important. But diagnosis is difficult, we know that. Standard tests would not be suitable for someone with an intellectual disability even before changes associated with dementia. So we look at a baseline assessment for people with Down syndrome from the age 30 is recommended, and that's a baseline to measure any future changes against. Now, future changes might not be associated with dementia, but are still worth pursuing and investigating. And what I want to do in the next few slides is highlight some of the free and available resources and tools that are out there for support. This produced by the National Task Group on Intellectual Disability and Dementia Practices in the States, and it's an early detection and screening instrument. And those of you who are familiar with the tools for assessment of dementia and Down syndrome, it's developed from the D-Squid tool in the UK. It's a free resource with a range of different translated versions available. And Jenny's diary that was mentioned earlier came out again of research highlighting the lack of awareness of their own diagnosis among participants in studies. And this is a book, and again, free to download, book and set of postcards, which firstly take us through a typical week for Jenny, our actress, and what things are changing for her, what's becoming difficult, and supports that can be put in place. We then look at a model for talking to Jenny about dementia that may or may not use the word dementia. And then we look at how to talk to, in this case, Jenny's partner about the changes that she's experiencing. So although this was developed from research findings, it was also developed with focus groups of people with intellectual disabilities and their families around the world. And they are all acknowledged. So to go back to the study again, a few more people for you to meet here. I'm not related to anybody here. These are my co-researchers on the study funded by the Alzheimer Society, looking at non-drug, non-pharmacological interventions. And the easiest way to show you an example of some of the changes, obviously protecting anonymity, was perhaps to look at one of the design changes that we've put in place as part of the study. We're in the second cycle now, and this is from cycle 1. So this was a lady who, this is her bedroom, who really enjoyed spending time. She lives with other people with an intellectual disability, but really likes spending time in her room on her own in quiet and craft activities. So she could take herself there if she needed to, and she could have some quiet time away from the hustle and bustle. This was becoming increasingly difficult, and she was struggling to see. Now, there's sight and vision issues there as well, but in terms of what was, for this lady, her goal setting was to be able to spend time in her room on her craft activities when she chose to do so in quiet. So we changed the lighting in her room. And it also have a dimmer switch fitted so that she could actually control how bright or otherwise it was. And that made all the difference to that lady being able to spend time. So staff reported that the distress she was showing at having to spend more time with other people in the noisy environments, it didn't just reduce, it went completely because she had this option again. One of the staff we interviewed said that what we're told is try this drug, we'll increase this drug, we'll double this dose. But actually, they said, why is this not being suggested? Why is this not being suggested? If not instead of medication, as well as medication. And just as an example, we had one participant with dementia and intellectual disability who typically was prescribed diazepam 5 to 6 times a week, and that's almost a daily basis, for what staff called behavioural issues. Agitation, anxiety. When we probed a bit further, this was what they said. For the 6 months period of the intervention study, when he was receiving non-drug supports, he received diazepam once. And staff were saying they had no idea there were other options. Medication was their default position, and that's what they went to, but not anymore. Not in these organisations who've been taking part in the study. Parents with children with Down syndrome would not have expected their children to outlive them. That is now happening. And that's a good thing. We're celebrating longer life. But it means that information about that person often goes with the parent, and we don't have the information to best provide support. So life story work is something we've introduced into the study as well, and it's part of an ongoing study at the moment. And life story work we're doing in a variety of formats. So we've got, there's a standard photo album in the image here. We're using a talking photo album where the person records. Just a memory box that the person decorates and takes ownership of. A whole range of different formats, but to capture that information. Because what we're realizing in terms of post-diagnostic support, that this needs to be part of a continuum, that we need to know the person before the diagnosis, before appropriate post-diagnostic support can be put in place. And what are we doing in terms of sharing the information from research and practice? Well, we're supporting organisations to think about to almost see the bigger picture. What I see is that organisations are reinventing the wheel. They're starting again with every new diagnosis, rather than learning from what's happened previously. And this is something that I think is transferable to a European context as well, that there is no need to reinvent the wheel. There are tools, there are resources, there are experiences available, whatever stage you're at in terms of supporting people with an intellectual disability and dementia. And a lesson that's come out really clearly is that staff, even though they may be experienced, need to relearn how they support people with an intellectual disability. But post-diagnostic support needs to be part of that continuum. So just in summary, and remembering that countries are at different stages, but the recommended best practice for inclusion, for post-diagnostic support, equally applies to people with an intellectual disability. We hear about the term hard-to-reach groups, and I would challenge that actually groups are not hard to reach. We don't always make that effort and make things inclusive in terms of people being able to take part or contribute. And as an example, I mean, I've been coming to Alzheimer Europe conferences for many years now, and initially was the lone voice talking about intellectual disability. So from that to this, I think speaks volumes in terms of Alzheimer Europe's approach in terms of recognising the variety of groups and populations that will be experiencing dementia. So partly that's also to do with some of my colleagues in the room who are working across Europe and the States in terms of supporting and working with families, but mostly it's because we are actively seeking the views of people with an intellectual disability and dementia and recognising their rights. And long may that continue. And those of us who are here, who are working in this field, are getting together this evening. And if anybody would like to join that conversation, if you have an interest in this area, then please do let me know. And you're very welcome to come and join us as well. And thank you. Sorry about the glitches. Thank you.